My phone buzzed against a stack of drywall, the screen flashing with a picture of a grizzled bear. Or my contractor, Gus. Same difference. "They're 15 out, Alex," he grunted, his voice a gravelly mix of coffee and sawdust. "The concrete truck. You tell me that turnaround is clear, right? Because if that driver can't swing his rig around, he's legally allowed to just dump 10 cubic yards of rapidly hardening goo right at the end of your road. Then he'll wave goodbye and send you a bill for the goo and the environmental cleanup. I am not kidding." I looked out the framed-out space where a picture window would one day go, surveying my kingdom. My kingdom, in this case, was a half-gutted 1970s ranch house at the absolute dead end of a long, narrow private road. I'd sunk every last dime from selling my soul to a San Francisco tech company into this place. It was my escape, my masterpiece, my ticket out of the rat race and into the slightly slower, more passive-aggressive hamster wheel of suburban life. I wanted peace and quiet. What I got was a homeowners association with a covenant thicker than my college physics textbook, and a presiding overlord named Carol, whose life mission was to ensure all lawn gnomes faced magnetic north. The road was the problem. It was so narrow that if two squirrels passed each other, one had to pull over. At the very end, just before my driveway, the asphalt blossomed into a small, circular cul-de-sac. This wasn't just any cul-de-sac. It was holy ground. A large, very official-looking sign stood at its entrance, proclaiming in stern red letters, "Emergency vehicle and evacuation turnaround. No parking at any time." To me, this patch of blacktop was the Panama Canal of my construction site. It was the crucial logistical linchpin for every delivery bigger than a pizza. Drywall, lumber, appliances, and today, the lifeblood of my new foundation, a goddamn concrete mixer. Without it, we were basically trying to build the pyramids with canoes. Everything, and I mean everything, depended on that turnaround being clear. My first real taste of the neighborhood's unique flavor had come from Carol a month prior. I'd come home to find a note, not just taped, but laminated and taped to my front door. It read, "A notice to the resident. Per HOA bylaw. 17. Section B, paragraph 4. Construction-related activities producing disruptive noise levels are to be respected. Your ambience has proven to be a detriment to the neighborhood's established serenity. Please be considerate." It was 10 a.m. on a Tuesday. I was pretty sure the established serenity could handle a circular saw. Carol was the self-appointed warden of our little slice of suburban paradise. She lived in the immaculate colonial just before the turnaround, with a lawn so green it looked like it was rendered by Pixar. She drove a golf cart with the personalized license plate, HOA 1, and had an aura of distilled entitlement that could curdle milk from 50 paces. "Alex, you there? Is it clear?" Gus's voice crackled, snapping me back to the present. I squinted. The sun glinted off something large, white, and offensively parked. "Yeah, Gus," I lied, a cold knot forming in my stomach. "It's crystal clear." My sneakers crunched on the gravel as I walked down the driveway. There, parked squarely in the geographic and spiritual center of the sacred turnaround, was a pearlescent white Cadillac Escalade. It was so big it had its own zip code, and it was positioned with a degree of geometric perfection that could only be intentional. It was Carol's suburban assault vehicle. I took a deep breath, counseling myself to be the bigger person. Be neighborly, kill them with kindness, or at least wound them with polite indifference. I spotted her on her front lawn, tending to a row of hydrangeas with the focus of a bomb disposal expert. "Hey, Carol, how's it going?" I called out, aiming for a breezy, unbothered tone. She didn't look up, just snipped a wilting leaf with a pair of tiny silver scissors. "Hello?" "Great day for gardening," I continued, the cheerfulness tasting like ash in my mouth. "Listen, quick favor. I've got a concrete truck coming in about 10 minutes, Any chance I could get you to move your car from the turnaround? She finally paused, holding up a perfect pink bloom to admire it. I'm only going to be a moment, she said, her voice dripping with condescension. I'm expecting a delivery of premium topsoil. Right, I get that, I said, my patience already fraying. But this is an emergency vehicle turnaround. It has to stay clear. And also a concrete mixer, a very, very large truck, needs to use it. Like, right now. At last, she turned to face me. She looked me up and down as if I were a particularly nasty stain on her pristine lawn. Young man, she began. And I knew nothing good ever followed those two words. This spot has always been used for temporary resident parking. I am a resident. This is temporary. Besides, your noisy, dirty trucks are a constant nuisance. Maybe they can just wait. I felt my eyes start to twitch. They can't wait. It's concrete. It literally gets hard. That's its whole thing. And that sign, I said, pointing a thumb at the huge red and white metal rectangle, says no parking, fire, and evac lane. Violators will be towed immediately at owner's expense. Carol produced a sound that was half scoff, half laugh. It was a scoff-aw. She waved a dismissive, dirt-caked glove in the sign's direction. Oh, that's just for show, she said, her voice oozing with smug certainty. To scare off delivery people. Don't be so dramatic. She turned back to her flowers. The conversation in her mind officially over. I stood there, motionless. The crickets chirped. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves. Her words echoed in the sudden silence of my brain. That's just for show. I looked at the sign, a beacon of order in a world of chaos. I looked at her massive, illegally parked SUV. I looked at my watch. The concrete truck was now less than 5 minutes away. My internal monologue was short and sweet. Okay, let's test that theory. I pulled out my phone. My thumb, moving with a will of its own, opened the camera and took a quick, time-stamped photo of the Escalade, parked directly in front of the sign. Then I Googled the name of the tow company printed at the bottom of the sign. The phone rang twice. County Line Towing, this is Brenda. Hi, Brenda, I said, my voice eerily calm. I'd like to report a vehicle illegally parked in a signed emergency turnaround. I gave her the address. White Escalade? She asked, a hint of amusement in her voice. The very one. We know the spot well, she said. A truck is 2 minutes out. I clicked off the phone and leaned against a tree, crossing my arms. I didn't have to wait long. 1 minute and 45 seconds later, a low rumble grew into a ground-shaking roar. It wasn't one truck, it was two. Two massive diesel-belching, chrome-plated monsters rolling down our quiet little road like a pair of mechanical velociraptors on the hunt. They pulled up, one in front of the Escalade, one behind. Two guys hopped out. They were a vision of industrial efficiency. The first guy, built like a vending machine with a beard, I'd later learn was Sal. The second, wiry and covered in tattoos, was Mitch. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. They moved with the silent understanding of a couple that had been married for 40 years. I watched, mesmerized, as they performed a beautiful, mechanical ballet. Mitch lowered the stinger on his truck while Sal expertly attached chains to the Escalade's frame. There was the satisfying clank of heavy-duty steel, the powerful hiss of hydraulics, the groan of expensive tires being forced to comply. It was the most satisfying thing I had seen in my entire life. They were just lifting the rear wheels off the ground, the pristine white whale of an SUV hanging in defeat, when the front door of Carol's house flew open. Her shriek cut through the morning serenity like a chainsaw. "What do you think you're doing?" Carol stormed across her perfect lawn, a tiny, furious woman in pastel gardening clothes. "That is my vehicle! You can't do that! This is theft! I'm calling the police!" Sal and Mitch didn't even flinch. Sal gave a final tug on a chain, shot Mitch a thumbs up, and went back to his cab. Mitch, with the deadpan focus of a surgeon, operated the controls, hoisting the Escalade further into the air. They were professionals. A suburban screech fest was just background noise to them. "Did you hear me?" she shrieked at me. "You did this!" "I didn't do anything, Carol," I said calmly, holding up my phone. "The sign did this. It's been telling you this would happen for years." True to her word, she was already dialing 911. As if on cue, the concrete mixer, a behemoth that made the tow trucks look like toys, rumbled to a stop at the entrance to our road, its driver taking in the whole soap opera with a look of profound amusement. 10 minutes later, a patrol car crunched to a stop. A police officer stepped out, and the sheer, unadulterated weariness on his face told me he'd seen this movie 100 times before. His name tag read Miller. "What's the problem here?" he asked, his voice flat. Carol launched into a breathless, high-pitched tirade. She accused me of organizing a grand theft auto ring. She claimed the tow truck drivers had threatened her. She painted a picture of herself as the innocent victim of a coordinated campaign of harassment by the neighborhood ruffian, me. Officer Miller listened with the patience of a saint who was 2 days from retirement. When she finally wound down, he turned to me, his expression unchanged. "Your side?" I explained the situation simply. "She was parked in the emergency turnaround. The sign is pretty clear. My concrete truck couldn't get through. I called the number on the sign." I showed him the time-stamped photo on my phone. He nodded slowly, then walked over to the sign. He read it carefully, top to bottom, as if deciphering ancient scripture. He sighed, a deep, soul-cleansing sigh that spoke of 1,000 petty disputes over property lines and barking dogs. He turned back to Carol. "Ma'am," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "This is a private road. The signage is posted by the Homeowners Association. It explicitly states that violators will be towed. The tow company was authorized by the sign to remove the vehicle. This is a civil matter between you, the HOA, and the towing company. There's nothing I can do." Carol's face went through 5 distinct shades of red. "But it's not fair." "Fair isn't my department, ma'am," Officer Miller said. He gave me a quick glance, a flicker of something, was it pity, solidarity, in his eyes, then tipped his hat. "Have a good day." As he drove off, the first tow truck, with Carol's Escalade hooked ignominiously behind it, rumbled away. The concrete mixer finally had its opening. It maneuvered into the now clear turnaround, its massive chute swinging into position over my foundation forms. Gus pulled up in his beat-up Ford Ranger and clapped me on the back hard enough to realign my spine. "Kid, you got guts," he said, a huge grin splitting his face. "You also just made a lifelong enemy. Was it worth it?" I watched the beautiful gray concrete begin to pour smoothly into the forms, the first real step toward building my dream. "Absolutely," I said. My victory lap lasted exactly 24 hours. The next afternoon, I opened my mailbox, and it vomited a flurry of official-looking envelopes. It was an ambush by stationery. Carol had weaponized the HOA. The first letter was a fine, $100. Reason: violation of Bylaw 23, Section F, Landscaping Aesthetics. Grass height measured at 3.5 inches, exceeding the 3-inch community standard. She must have come out with a ruler. The second was a formal warning. Violation of Bylaw 41, Section D, Exterior Material Standards. A tarpaulin of a non-approved shade of blue is covering construction materials in public view. My tarp was, apparently, too vibrant. The approved colors were discreet beige, subtle taupe, and quiet fawn. The third was a citation, complete with a blurry photograph for a contractor's truck leaking a single drop of oil on the street. They were demanding I pay for a professional hazardous materials remediation team But the pièce de résistance was the last one. A cease and desist letter from the Architectural Review Committee, which I knew consisted of Carol and 2 of her bridge club cronies. It demanded I halt all construction immediately and retroactively submit my entire renovation plan for their approval, a process they noted could take up to 90 days. I spread the notices out on my dusty plywood subfloor like a losing hand of poker. This wasn't just about annoyance anymore. This was a coordinated attack designed to bleed me dry with fines and halt my project indefinitely. I showed the list to Gus the next morning. He just laughed, a deep booming sound that echoed in the half-finished house. "Oh yeah, this is classic," he said, wiping a tear from his eye. "This is a level 4 Karen strike. You're lucky she hasn't reported you to the EPA for kicking up too much dust yet." "What do I do?" I asked. "I can't afford to stop working for 3 months." Gus took a sip of his coffee, his expression turning serious. "These people have nothing better to do. Their lives are empty, so they fill them by controlling other people's lives. You can't ignore them, and you can't fight them head-on with logic. That's not a language they speak. You gotta play their game. You need to read that rulebook, Alex. Read it like it's the Bible. Every single stupid word. That weekend, I declared war. My weapons were a bottle of cheap whiskey, a yellow highlighter, and the 300-page PDF of the covenants, conditions, and restrictions of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association. I dove in. It was a journey into the heart of suburban madness. There were rules for the exact placement of satellite dishes. There were regulations on the acceptable decibel level of wind chimes. There was an entire subsection, complete with diagrams, on the correct way to roll your garbage can to the curb to ensure the handle faced your own property, not your neighbor's. My narration of this discovery would have been filled with disbelief and a string of curse words that would make a sailor blush. But as I waded deeper into the swamp of bureaucratic insanity, a glorious realization dawned on me. The bylaws were a tangled, contradictory, impossible-to-follow mess. They had created a rule book so complex that no one could possibly be in full compliance, not even its chief evangelist. The next morning, armed with my phone and a newfound sense of purpose, I went for a walk. I became a spy in my own neighborhood. I started with Carol's house. I snapped a picture of her prize-winning hydrangeas. Beautiful, yes. But according to Appendix C, Section 4, Approved Flora, they were a non-native, unapproved species. Click. I noticed a string of Christmas lights, still coiled up behind a drain pipe from last winter. A clear violation of Bylaw 31, Section G, which stated all seasonal decorations must be removed within 15 days of the holiday. Click. Then I got out my tape measure. I casually strolled past her white picket fence, pretending to take a phone call. The bylaws were explicit. No fence in a front-facing yard could exceed a height of 36 inches. Carol's fence stood at a proud, defiant 39. Click, click, click. That evening, I typed up a formal, impeccably formatted complaint. I didn't use my name. It was from a concerned homeowner. I cited the exact bylaw codes for each of her violations, attached my photographic evidence, and emailed it to the third-party management company that handled the HOA's administrative tasks. I knew they were legally obligated to forward all formal complaints to the Architectural Review Committee for action. I had just forced Carol to fine herself. It was a small, petty shot across the bow, but it felt incredible. It was a message. I can play this game too. The HOA notices stopped. For a week, an uneasy truce settled over our little dead-end road. I almost allowed myself to believe I had won. I was a fool. Carol wasn't retreating. She was reloading. The day the roof trusses were scheduled to arrive was a big one. It was the skeleton of my house. the most expensive and logistically complex delivery of the entire build. A 50-foot flatbed truck would have to slowly, carefully back its way down the narrow road. I was outside with Gus, ready to guide the driver, when the truck appeared. And then it stopped, blocked. Carol and her husband, Bob, were gardening. Bob was a meek, terrified-looking man who always seemed to be apologizing for taking up space. They had chosen to do their gardening right on the edge of the road, with a wheelbarrow, a collection of shovels, and several bags of mulch positioned just so, narrowing the already tight passage to an impossible width. The truck driver, a young guy who looked thoroughly confused, leaned out his window. Before I could say anything, Carol was upon him, a smile plastered on her face that didn't reach her cold, dead eyes. "Oh, you must be lost, dear," she chirped, loud enough for the whole neighborhood to hear. "There's no construction happening down here. This is a quiet residential street. You probably need to go back to the main road." Bob just stood there, wringing his hands, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else in the universe. "What? No, I've got the address right here," the driver said, looking at his clipboard. I sprinted down the road, Gus right behind me. "Carol, what the hell are you doing? Move your stuff, now." "I have no idea what you're talking about," she said, feigning innocence. "We are simply enjoying our Saturday by beautifying our property." A heated argument erupted. It was a 10-minute standoff, a ridiculous suburban traffic jam caused by a wheelbarrow and pure spite. We eventually got them to move, but the damage was done. The delay pushed the crane rental into overtime. Carol's little gardening project cost me an extra $700. That night, staring at the invoice, the humor was gone. This wasn't a game anymore. This was a direct attack on my home, my dream, and my rapidly dwindling bank account. She wanted to break me. Fine. The gloves were off. I didn't just want to win. I wanted to build a monument to my victory that she would have to look at every single day for the rest of her life. Gus and I were sitting on a stack of plywood that would eventually be my kitchen floor, nursing a pair of beers. The frame of the roof was up, silhouetted against the evening sky, but I couldn't enjoy it. I was fuming, replaying the wheelbarrow incident in my head. "You're thinking too much, kid," Gus said, reading my mind. "Don't get mad, get legal. There's got to be a nuke hidden somewhere in that crazy book of hers. Something so perfectly by the rules that she can't do a damn thing about it." He was right. I pulled out my phone, the screen's glow illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I opened the 300-page PDF of the HOA Bible and started scrolling. I wasn't just reading anymore. I was hunting, and then I found it. It was buried deep, deep, in a section titled Fencing, Walls, and Boundary Demarcations. My heart started to beat faster. It was a single, beautiful sentence. Any property owner may, at their own expense, erect a privacy fence along their property line up to the maximum community height of 6 feet, provided the materials are from the pre-approved list in Appendix F. I scrolled frantically to Appendix F. It was a short list of acceptable fencing materials: cedar, pressure-treated pine, wrought iron, and vinyl. A list of approved vinyl colors followed. There was Arctic white, sandstone, and then I saw it. The ugliest color I had ever seen, a sickly yellowish beige that the manufacturer had inexplicably named Depressing Fawn. I looked at Gus, a slow, maniacal grin spreading across my face. "Gus," I said, my voice trembling with excitement, "I think I found the nuke." My property line, the one I had professionally surveyed when I bought the place, ran directly alongside the narrow road. It passed less than 10 feet from Carol's prize-winning hydrangeas, her meticulously manicured lawn, and her massive front picture window. She looked out that window every single day. The next morning I made 2 phone calls. The first was to the survey company, asking them to come out and stake my property line with bright orange flags. The second was to a fencing contractor. "Yeah, I need a quote for about 150 feet of 6-foot vinyl privacy fence," I said. "No problem," the guy on the phone replied. "What color are you thinking? The white is very popular." "I want the depressing fawn." There was a long pause. "You sure, man?" the contractor asked, his voice laced with concern. "We stock that color, but nobody's ever actually ordered it. It's really ugly." "It's perfect," I said. "As required by Bylaw 52, Section C, Notice of Improvements, I typed up a simple notice of construction, installation of perimeter privacy fence, and posted it on my door 48 hours before the work was scheduled to begin. It didn't take long for the shark to smell blood in the water." Carol marched over, the notice clutched in her hand like it was evidence of a crime. "What is this? What fence? You can't build a fence here," she sputtered. I just smiled. A serene, beatific smile I'm sure she wanted to slap right off my face. I handed her a neatly printed packet. It contained a copy of the bylaw, the page from Appendix F with depressing fawn circled, and a copy of my official property survey. She scanned the documents, her face contorting in confusion, then rage, and finally the dawning horror of comprehension. I had her. It was all there, in black and white, in the very rule book she held so dear. She was powerless. For the first time since I'd met her, Carol was speechless. Construction day was glorious. The fencing contractors arrived, a crew of brutally efficient guys who had clearly seen it all. They looked at the color of the vinyl panels, shook their heads, and got to work. With a symphony of post-hole diggers and cordless drills, the fence of spite began to rise. It was a monument to malicious compliance, a 6-foot-tall, impenetrable wall of sheer, unadulterated ugliness. It completely obliterated the view from Carol's house, transforming her charming colonial vista into a sheer cliff face of vomit beige plastic. Neighbors started to emerge from their houses, drawn by the commotion. Some looked on in horror. Others, I noticed, were filming on their phones from behind their curtains, trying to stifle their laughter. Carol, naturally, was having a complete public meltdown on her lawn. She was screaming about property values, about aesthetics, about the very fabric of the community. And, of course, she called the cops. Officer Miller's patrol car pulled up, and he got out with the weary resignation of a man on his final tour of duty in a war he'd long since lost. "He can't do this!" Carol shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at the fence. "It's hideous! It's blocking my son!" I calmly walked over and handed Officer Miller my packet of documents. He looked at the survey markers, the brightly colored orange flags running along the base of the new fence line. He looked at the printed-out bylaw. He looked at the fence. He looked at Carol's apoplectic face. Then he looked back at me, and in that moment, I saw it. The slightest, almost imperceptible nod of respect. A silent salute from one veteran of the HOA wars to another. He turned to Carol. "Ma'am," he said, his voice flat and final. "Once again, this is a civil matter, and from what I can see, Mr. Peterson appears to be in full compliance with the community's own rules." He got back in his car and drove away, leaving Carol standing in the shadow of my magnificent, hideous fence. The fence was done. And then a strange and wonderful thing happened. Nothing. The violation notices stopped. My contractors came and went without incident. Large trucks used the turnaround, which remained miraculously clear at all times. All I heard from Carol's house was a profound and deeply satisfying silence. The neighborhood seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief. A few days later, the guy from 3 doors down, a quiet accountant I'd never spoken to, dropped off a 6-pack of craft beer on my doorstep with a note that just said thanks. The next day, the woman from across the street brought over a plate of still warm chocolate chip cookies. It was a silent, suburban thank you for deposing the local tyrant. That evening, Gus and I were sitting on my newly finished deck, drinking the accountant's beer. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow on my nearly completed house. We looked out at the fence of spite, a long, ugly scar on the picturesque landscape. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. "You know," Gus said, taking a long pull from his bottle, "for an extra $50, the contractor told me we could have gotten it in a color called passive-aggressive pink." I threw my head back and laughed, a real, genuine laugh that echoed in the quiet evening air. I came to the suburbs looking for a quiet life. I didn't find it. So I built a 6-foot-tall, vinyl-sided HOA-approved version of it instead. And it was worth every single penny.